In 2017, we walked into our first fertility clinic, hopeful yet uncertain, seeking answers as to why we hadn't yet conceived. You see, for nearly a decade of marriage, we lived by what we called the 2-year plan, always telling ourselves we were ready to start a family in just 2 more years. At 23 years old, after more than 2 years of not preventing pregnancy, we mentioned it to our doctor. He reassured us that if we weren't quite ready yet, it would just happen when it was meant to happen. So we carried on, assuming everything was fine, and we were just lucky to be able to follow our own timeline. But then, 2 years turned into 4, then 6, then 8. And through all those years, as casual as we tried to be about it, it was still deeply disappointing to never see 2 pink lines. Eventually, it was time to face the reality we had been quietly avoiding. That first clinic visit was nerve-wracking. For the first time, we were officially labeled infertile. Infertile. Even though we already suspected something was wrong, hearing it confirmed hit harder than we expected. But what was even harder? The way the news was delivered. I remember sitting in that cold clinic room, still reeling from the shock of being labeled infertile, when the doctor looked at me and casually asked, "So, would you like to try IUI or IVF?" Just like that. No explanation, no empathy, just a fork in the road with no map. I felt frozen, like time had stopped. But my heart was racing, my mind overwhelmed, and I was nowhere near to make a decision like that. So, instead of rushing, I did what so many of us do in those situations. I went home and I fell down a rabbit hole of research, questions, and late-night Google searches. I pored over medical studies, watched videos, joined forums, and read stories from others walking this path. I needed to understand what it all meant, the procedures, the risks, the costs, the emotions. I needed time to grieve what I thought the journey to motherhood would look like. And most of all, I needed time to listen to my heart. Because decisions like this, decisions that involve our future, your body, your family, deserve more than the 30 seconds this doctor was giving me. So we ended up starting with IUI, also known as the turkey baster method. A few rounds, all unsuccessful. It was frustrating, but we weren't giving up. We switched clinics and began the IVF process. Feeling hopeful but nervous, the doctor at this clinic was robotic but oddly reassuring. Then came our first setback. During a routine blood draw, I casually mentioned a recent trip to Mexico. That one comment triggered an immediate pause in our IVF journey. Due to the CDC's guideline on Zika virus exposure, particularly its risk for those trying to conceive, our cycle was now postponed by 6 months due to Mexico being a high-risk country at the time. This delay sucked. I had finally reached that point in my life where I was truly ready to build a family, to nurture something bigger than myself, to experience the joy of becoming a mother. It was a decision filled with hope and deep longing, but instead of excitement and progress, I found myself staring at a dream that felt impossibly far away. Finally, after several months, we were ready for our first round of IVF. That first cycle was very promising. They retrieved 17 eggs, which is a great number. And on day 3, a whopping 14 fertilized eggs were still growing. The nurse even joked that we might need a bigger house. A few days later, it was finally time for our first embryo transfer. I found myself in that freezing exam room once again, half-dressed and desperately needing to pee, thanks to the 48 ounces of water I had dutifully chugged 2 hours earlier, just as the nurse had instructed. A rookie mistake I didn't make again. At this point, all I could do was wait, nerves building as the procedure was about to begin. I was now PUPO, pregnant until proven otherwise. Then came the dreaded 2-week wait, a relentless mental tug-of-war between hope and fear. Every twinge, every flutter made my heart race. Am I pregnant? What if it didn't stick? What if it ends in miscarriage? Is it a boy? A girl? Twins, maybe? The questions swirled endlessly, and the uncertainty felt like emotional torture. I wanted so badly to believe it worked, but I was terrified to let myself hope too much. Those days were some of the longest, most emotionally exhausting of my life. But then it worked. As tears streamed down my face, I welcomed my daughter Eliza into this world. After only 48 hours of labor, but it was beyond worth it. I had never felt so much love and joy before and quickly fell into the world of motherhood. I always wanted my children close in age, so when Eliza was 6 months old, I was eager to jump back into treatment. But stopping breastfeeding felt like too big a sacrifice for something that might not work. So we waited until Eliza was 18 months and naturally weaning. Now, previously, I mentioned that 14 fertilized eggs were still growing, but in the end, we only had 3 embryos frozen. But I assumed it's okay, it'll still be easy. After all, our first embryo stuck. But I quickly learned that just because it worked once doesn't mean it will again. This time around, our transfer failed. And saying I was devastated doesn't even come close to capturing the depth of how I felt. I had built up so much hope, believing with every part of me that this was it, that this would be the sibling for my daughter. I had envisioned Eliza playing with her little brother or sister and enjoying all those fun moments together. So when the call came and I heard the words, "You're not pregnant," it felt like all the air had been sucked from my lungs. It wasn't just disappointment, it was heartbreak. Like 1,000 tiny daggers piercing through a dream I had so carefully crafted in my mind. I sat in that pain, overwhelmed by the weight of what was lost. Not just an embryo, but the future I had already begun to love. I wasn't ready to give up just yet, so we transferred our last 2 embryos together. And to our surprise, we saw 2 pink lines, and I was pregnant. Everything seemed perfect until we learned the pregnancy wasn't viable. Losing that pregnancy was yet another huge heartbreak I wasn't ready for, and I immediately wanted to forget all the pain. So, through tears, I remember asking my doctor a question I never thought I'd ask. "So, is it okay if I have a drink or 2? Maybe just a glass of wine?" Because in that moment, I really needed one. I spent the next several months trapped in a heartbreaking limbo, watching the pregnancy hormones slowly decline week after week. Just waiting for the day they said we could try again. We agreed to try one final retrieval, and it ended up with 2 additional embryos. But unfortunately, both ended in chemical pregnancies. At this point, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting to give Eliza a sibling. But we had already decided that this would be our last attempt. We were done. And then something told me to try one last time. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the fact that it was October and we knew that we had already met our deductible. Either way, we gave it one more shot. Once again, we ended up with 2 more embryos, and I told my doctor, "This is it, transfer them both." The 2-week wait felt unbearable. I tested every single day. When I finally saw a faint line, I was cautiously hopeful, but also jaded. I had seen faint lines before, only to have them disappear. But this time, it stuck. 9 months later, I met my daughter Violet. Luckily, after only 12 hours of labor this time. And I couldn't wait to see my girls grow up together. As Violet neared a year old, I found myself grappling with emotions. Could I do IVF again? Did I even want to? Deep down, I knew my IVF journey was over, so I started donating baby clothes and officially closed that chapter of my life. And then, 2 weeks later, I had a dream. I dreamt I was pregnant. I saw myself taking a positive pregnancy test. It felt so real, that just for fun, I took an actual test. It was positive. January 11th, 2024 is a day I will never forget. After all those years of infertility, after every failed cycle, after every heartbreak, the impossible happened. We conceived naturally, and 9 months later, we welcomed our surprise baby, Adrian. And today, the couple that once struggled with infertility is now scheduling a vasectomy. Infertility is a journey filled with pain, resilience, and unexpected miracles. It challenges you in ways you never imagined, but it also teaches you strength, patience, and hope. Our story may not have followed the plan we envisioned, but it led us to exactly where we were meant to be.